10 car companies ruled the roads when you were born. Today, they're automotive ghosts, but their final models are hiding in plain sight. The twist? One of these dead brands actually outsold BMW and Mercedes before vanishing forever. Back when gas was cheap and horsepower was king, Pontiac owned the streets. This wasn't just another GM division making boring family cars. These guys built machines that could wake up the neighbors 3 blocks away. The GTO hit showrooms in 1964 like a thunderbolt. Nobody expected a mid-sized car with a massive V8 engine to become America's new obsession. But there it was, looking mean and sounding meaner. The Firebird followed in 1967, giving the Camaro some serious competition within GM's own family. Talk about sibling rivalry. Here's what made Pontiac special. They understood that regular people wanted extraordinary cars. You didn't need a trust fund to own something that looked like it belonged on a racetrack. Their styling was bold, sometimes borderline crazy, but always memorable. Split grills, hood scoops, and racing stripes weren't just decorations. They were statements. By 1978, Pontiac was selling over 900,000 cars a year. That's nearly 1 million people choosing excitement over practicality. The Trans Am, with its screaming chicken decal, became a cultural icon thanks to movies like Smokey and the Bandit. Burt Reynolds made that car cooler than any advertising campaign ever could. Then the 1980s arrived with new rules nobody saw coming. Emissions regulations and safety requirements started choking the life out of those big engines. The government wanted cleaner air and safer roads. Makes sense, right? But Pontiac's whole identity was built on raw power and bold design. The brand tried adapting. They made smaller cars, more efficient engines, even some genuinely good vehicles. But something got lost in translation. The excitement faded. Customers who once lined up for Firebirds started looking elsewhere for their thrills. When GM filed for bankruptcy in 2009, tough decisions had to be made. Pontiac, despite its legendary status, couldn't justify its existence anymore. The last Pontiac rolled off the assembly line in 2010, ending 84 years of automotive passion. But here's the thing about automotive history. Some brands die because they couldn't adapt, while others disappear despite having decades of innovation behind them. While Pontiac grabbed headlines with flashy muscle cars, there was another American brand quietly making history for over a century. Oldsmobile didn't just survive in the car business, it practically helped invent it. Founded in 1897, Olds was cranking out vehicles when most people still thought cars were a passing fad. The brand became America's automotive grandfather, watching the entire industry grow up around it. But being old doesn't automatically make you wise, and Oldsmobile would learn that lesson the hard way. The company hit its stride with models that became household names. The Cutlass dominated the 1970s like a champion boxer, becoming America's best-selling car for several years running. Then there was the 442, a muscle car that could go toe-to-toe with any Pontiac GTO. These weren't just cars, they were statements. Oldsmobile also pioneered something we take for granted today, the automatic transmission. While other manufacturers were still making drivers wrestle with manual gearboxes, Olds figured out how to let the car do the work. Revolutionary? Absolutely. But innovation alone doesn't guarantee survival. The 1980s brought a problem that would eventually kill the brand. GM's bean counters decided all their divisions should share more parts to save money. Makes sense, right? Well, not when your Oldsmobile starts looking identical to a Chevrolet or Buick. Customers couldn't tell the difference anymore, and why pay extra for an Olds badge when a cheaper Chevy offered the same thing? Sales began sliding faster than a car on black ice. The brand that once represented American innovation suddenly felt redundant. Loyal customers started asking themselves why they were paying premium prices for what was essentially a rebadged economy car. By 2004, after 107 years of building cars, Oldsmobile produced its final vehicle, a burgundy Alero that rolled off the assembly line and straight into automotive history. The oldest continuous car brand in America was officially dead. But Oldsmobile wasn't the only victim of corporate confusion and overlapping identities. Another American brand was struggling with its own identity crisis, caught awkwardly between its parent company's budget and luxury divisions. Ford had a problem in the 1930s. Their basic cars were too cheap, but Lincoln was way too expensive for most buyers. What do you do when there's a giant gap in your lineup? Create something in between, of course. Enter Mercury in 1938. The brand was designed to be Ford's middle child, fancier than a regular Ford, but not as pricey as a Lincoln. Think of it as the Goldilocks solution. Not too cheap, not too expensive, but just right for families who wanted something a little special without breaking the bank. And it worked. Mercury found its sweet spot with models like the Cougar, which gave buyers a sporty alternative to the Mustang. The Grand Marquis became the go-to choice for people who needed a big, comfortable family car that felt more upscale than a basic sedan. These weren't revolutionary vehicles, but they hit the target perfectly. Then there's the weird part. Mercury actually had some genuinely cool moments. The 1949 Mercury became a hot-rodding legend after James Dean drove one. Later, the Marauder muscle car could compete with anything Detroit was building. Mercury wasn't just playing it safe. They had personality when they wanted to. But here's where things got messy. By the 1990s, Ford started making their regular cars nicer, and Lincoln became more affordable. Mercury got squeezed from both sides. A Mercury Sable looked almost identical to a Ford Taurus. Why pay more for basically the same car with different badges? The brand lost its reason to exist. Mercury dealers were selling cars that customers could get cheaper down the street at Ford dealerships. Makes sense why sales started tanking, right? Mercury's final years were painful to watch. The brand that once had a clear mission became a collection of rebadged Fords with slightly different grills. Their last car rolled off the line in 2011, ending 73 years of existence. While Mercury was struggling to find its identity in its final decades, another American brand was taking a completely different approach to standing out from the crowd. While Pontiac, Oldsmobile, and Mercury were all owned by massive corporations with deep pockets, AMC fought like the scrappy underdog it was. American Motors Corporation didn't have General Motors' billions or Ford's vast dealer network. What they had was pure desperation, and that made them dangerous. AMC threw conventional wisdom out the window. When everyone else was building massive gas guzzlers, they said, hey, what if cars were actually affordable to drive? The result? Cars that looked like nothing else on American roads. The Gremlin looked like someone took a normal car and chopped off the back half with a hacksaw. Ugly, absolutely. But it was cheap, reliable, and got decent gas mileage when oil prices went crazy in the 1970s. AMC sold over 670,000 of these things because sometimes practical beats pretty. Then came the Pacer. This wide, bubble-shaped car with massive windows looked like a fishbowl on wheels. AMC marketed it as the first wide small car, which sounds ridiculous until you realize it actually worked. The Pacer became a cultural icon, appearing in movies and turning heads everywhere it went. But here's the kicker. AMC was genuinely innovative. They introduced the first American hatchback years before Detroit's big boys caught on. They pioneered buyer protection plans and pushed fuel efficiency when nobody else cared. The company even owned Jeep, which kept them alive longer than they deserved. The problem? Being right doesn't always mean being profitable. AMC couldn't afford the massive advertising campaigns or sprawling dealer networks that moved cars in bulk. They were David fighting multiple Goliaths, and eventually the stones ran out. By 1987, Chrysler swooped in and bought the pieces they wanted, mainly Jeep. The AMC badge disappeared forever, taking with it one of the most creative and stubborn car companies America ever produced. Speaking of brands that tried to stand out from the crowd, Plymouth spent decades being the everyman's car before discovering they had their own identity crisis brewing. Plymouth was supposed to be the scrappy value fighter in Chrysler's lineup, the brand that regular folks could afford without feeling like they were driving a penalty box. For decades, that strategy worked brilliantly. The Barracuda hit showrooms in 1964, 2 weeks before Ford's Mustang. 2 weeks! Plymouth almost invented the pony car craze, but Ford grabbed all the glory. Still, the Cuda became a muscle car legend with its massive engines and aggressive styling. Then there was the Roadrunner, a car literally named after a cartoon character that could embarrass Corvettes at red lights. But Plymouth's real genius wasn't just muscle cars. The brand knew how to read the room. When families needed practical transportation, Plymouth delivered the Voyager minivan in 1984. This wasn't some half-hearted attempt either. Plymouth practically created the modern minivan segment alongside Dodge. Soccer moms everywhere suddenly had something cooler than a station wagon. Here's where things get messy, though. Chrysler started playing a dangerous game of badge engineering. The same car would roll off the assembly line wearing Plymouth, Dodge, or Chrysler badges with barely any differences. Why buy a Plymouth Acclaim when the Dodge Spirit sitting next to it was essentially identical? Customers started asking the same question. Plymouth's identity crisis deepened through the 1990s. The brand that once stood for accessible performance and smart family haulers became just another nameplate on generic sedans. Dealers couldn't explain why someone should choose Plymouth over Dodge. Neither could Chrysler executives, apparently. The final Plymouth Neon rolled off the line in 2001, ending 73 years of production. At its peak in the 1970s, Plymouth was America's third largest car brand, but sharing too much DNA with its siblings killed what made it special. While Plymouth was fading into automotive history, across the Pacific, another brand was making waves with affordable sports cars and reliable sedans. Japanese automakers were proving you didn't need flashy marketing. Just build something people actually wanted to drive. While American brands were busy copying each other and losing their way, something interesting was happening from across the Pacific. A little Japanese company called Datsun was quietly revolutionizing what Americans thought about foreign cars. This wasn't your typical invasion story, though. Datsun hit American shores with a simple promise: reliable cars that didn't cost a fortune and actually stayed running. Wild concept, right? But here's where it gets fascinating. They didn't just bring boring economy boxes. The 240Z sports car launched in 1969 and absolutely destroyed the British competition. We're talking about a sleek, fast machine that cost half what a Jaguar did and didn't leak oil all over your driveway. The timing couldn't have been better. Gas prices were climbing, American muscle cars were getting strangled by emissions rules, and suddenly, this affordable Japanese sports car looked brilliant. The Z car became a legend almost overnight. It outsold every British sports car combined during the 1970s. Then there were the everyday Datsuns, the B210, the 510, the pickup trucks that refused to die. These weren't glamorous machines, but they started every morning and ran for 200,000 miles without drama. American car buyers were getting tired of their domestic rides, spending more time at the repair shop than in their driveways. But here's the weird part. Just when Datsun was winning hearts and building serious brand loyalty, the parent company made a shocking decision. Nissan wanted their corporate name on American cars instead of Datsun. Makes sense from a business perspective, but it confused the hell out of customers. The transition started in the early 1980s. Suddenly you had cars wearing both badges, then just Nissan. By 1986, Datsun was completely gone from American showrooms. The brand that introduced Americans to reliable Japanese engineering just vanished overnight. The irony? Datsun proved that American car buyers were hungry for dependable, affordable vehicles with character. They showed Detroit exactly what customers wanted. But while Japanese automakers were learning these lessons and thriving, some American companies were about to discover that building tough, practical vehicles required a completely different approach. While most car brands dreamed of sleek sedans and flashy sports cars, International Harvester had dirt under its fingernails and wasn't ashamed of it. This company knew tractors before they knew transmissions, farming equipment before fuel injection. But here's the thing nobody expected. They made some of the toughest consumer vehicles America ever saw. The Scout II wasn't trying to win beauty contests. It looked like someone took a tool shed and slapped wheels on it, then decided that was perfect. Boxy, no nonsense, built like a brick house that could climb mountains. While other SUVs worried about carpet stains, the Scout laughed at mud puddles and asked for more. Then there were their pickups. These weren't trucks for hauling groceries or impressing neighbors. They were workhorses that happened to have license plates. International Harvester understood something other manufacturers forgot. Some people actually used their vehicles for real work. Wild concept, right? The weird part is how the Scout became Jeep's biggest headache. CJ owners suddenly had competition from this farm-tough underdog that could go anywhere a Jeep could go, then keep going when the Jeep needed a break. Off-road enthusiasts started paying attention to this tractor company that accidentally made excellent adventure vehicles. But 1980 hit like a cold slap of reality. The last Scout II rolled off the production line, taking with it one of America's most honest automotive experiments. International Harvester looked at the numbers, looked at their core business, and made a choice. Tractors and commercial trucks paid the bills. Consumer cars, that was somebody else's game. The company shifted focus entirely to heavy-duty commercial vehicles and farming equipment. Makes sense when you think about it. Why compete in crowded showrooms when you already own the fields and construction sites? While International Harvester was making practical decisions about dirt and durability, another story was brewing across the Atlantic. Sometimes the most interesting automotive failures come from the most unexpected combinations of countries and engineering philosophies. You know how sometimes a business plan sounds brilliant on paper but crashes spectacularly in real life? Well, meet Sterling. This was Britain's attempt to crack the American luxury car market in the late 1980s, and boy, did they have big dreams. The concept seemed foolproof. Take Rover's British heritage and styling, marry it to Honda's legendary reliability, and sell it to Americans who wanted something classier than a regular sedan but couldn't afford a BMW. What could go wrong? Sterling launched in 1987 with their flagship 825 model. The car actually looked pretty sharp. Clean lines, decent interior, and that whole sophisticated European vibe that marketing teams love. They positioned it as British luxury with Japanese reliability, which honestly sounds like exactly what car buyers would want. But here's where things get interesting. The reliability part? Yeah, that didn't quite work out. Despite Honda's involvement, Sterling cars developed a reputation for electrical problems, transmission issues, and other headaches that luxury buyers definitely weren't expecting. Word spreads fast in the car world, and Sterling's reputation took a beating. The weird part is that Sterling wasn't technically lying about the Honda connection. The 825 shared its basic platform with the Honda Legend, which was actually a solid car. But somehow in the translation from Honda's engineering to Sterling's execution, things got lost. Maybe it was the British electrical systems, maybe it was quality control issues during assembly. Whatever it was, customers weren't happy. Sales never really took off. American buyers who wanted reliability stuck with Honda or Toyota. Those seeking luxury went with established German brands. Sterling found itself stuck in automotive no man's land, not reliable enough for practical buyers, not prestigious enough for status seekers. By 1991, just 4 years after launch, Sterling threw in the towel and exited the American market entirely. The brand itself shut down completely. It was one of those business ventures that looked great in the boardroom, but couldn't survive real-world competition. Speaking of cars that captured imaginations despite short lifespans, there's one brand that managed to become legendary with even fewer years in business. While most car companies tried to blend in with American tastes, Saab did the exact opposite. These Swedish engineers seemed to ask themselves, what if we made cars that looked like spaceships and sounded like jet engines? The answer was pure automotive weirdness that somehow worked. Founded by aircraft engineers, Saab brought airplane thinking to the road. Their ignition switches sat between the front seats instead of the steering column. Why? Safety, of course. The engineers figured it would prevent knee injuries during crashes. Makes sense when you think about it from a pilot's perspective, right? Then there's the turbo obsession. Saab didn't just add turbochargers, they made them the star of the show. The 900 Turbo became a cult classic in the 1980s, delivering surprising punch from small engines. American buyers who wanted something different ate it up. These weren't muscle cars, but they had their own special kind of performance magic. But the weird part is how loyal Saab owners became. They formed clubs, shared repair tips, and defended their quirky Swedish rides like family members. The cars had personality flaws, electrical gremlins, odd part placements, repair costs that made wallets cry. Yet owners stuck around because Saab offered something no other brand could: genuine uniqueness wrapped in Scandinavian safety engineering. General Motors bought Saab in 1989, promising to keep the Swedish soul alive while adding reliability. Instead, GM slowly squeezed out what made Saab special. The cars became more conventional, losing that aircraft-inspired quirkiness that originally attracted buyers. Sales dropped as the brand identity blurred. After GM's bankruptcy, Saab bounced between different owners like a pinball. Each promised revival, but none could recapture the original magic. The last Saab rolled off production lines in 2012, ending decades of automotive rebellion against ordinary thinking. Well, speaking of rebellion, some entrepreneurs took defying convention to completely insane levels. One particular dreamer decided building cars with materials from kitchen appliances was perfectly reasonable. Here's a car company that lasted just 6 years but became more famous than brands that existed for decades. DeLorean Motor Company built exactly one model, sold fewer than 9,000 cars total, and somehow became legendary. John DeLorean wasn't your typical car executive. The guy had worked at GM, helped create the Pontiac GTO, and looked like he belonged in Hollywood rather than Detroit. In 1975, he decided to start his own company and build the most futuristic sports car ever made. The DMC-12 was unlike anything on American roads. Gull-wing doors that opened upward like butterfly wings. An entire body made from brushed stainless steel that never needed paint. Sharp, angular lines that screamed, "I'm from the future." It looked incredible parked next to boring sedans and family wagons. But here's where things get weird. DeLorean built his factory in Northern Ireland, of all places. The British government threw money at the project, hoping to create jobs in a troubled region. Makes sense from their perspective, but it created massive logistical headaches. Then there's the engine situation. This futuristic sports car got a 130 horsepower V6 borrowed from a Peugeot. 0 to 60 took nearly 9 seconds, which was painfully slow for something that looked so fast. The car weighed over 2,800 pounds thanks to that stainless steel body and heavy gull-wing door mechanisms. Quality control became a nightmare. Cars arrived at dealers with panel gaps, electrical problems, and doors that didn't align properly. At $25,000 in 1981, money buyers expected perfection. They got headaches instead. DeLorean himself got caught up in an FBI cocaine trafficking sting in 1982, though he was later acquitted. By then, the company was already collapsing under financial pressure and poor sales. The weird part is what happened next. Back to the Future hit theaters in 1985, 3 years after the company died. Suddenly, every kid in America wanted a DeLorean time machine. The movie turned a failed sports car into a pop culture icon. Today, those 8,583 surviving DeLoreans are worth more than they cost when new. Sometimes being a spectacular failure makes you more memorable than quiet success.